Okay. Thank you. So hello also from my side, everyone. My name is Christina. I am from the Access Europe team, and I will talk about the characteristics of EU-funded projects. This has been a part of the session earlier this year. It was just mentioned by my colleague, Emily. So this is a short reminder and a quick overview. First characteristic, EU projects are, big surprise, project-based. That means that they should be about innovation, focusing on new initiatives, on results. So it's not about existing work. They can be about network building, exchange of best practice across countries, joint research campaigns. But what does that mean in concrete is that there are only a handful of operating grants available. So no core funding, no building or construction work, no capital projects, no properties, literally no lights or doors. There is one exception, it's a LEADER program, and my colleagues probably could pop more info about that in the chat. But again, mainly it's project-based. EU projects are competitive. You are competing with thousands of organizations across Europe. That can be extremely competitive. Budgets may seem huge in the beginning, but it is important to keep that in perspective and to understand that the funding available is actually relatively small when spread across the whole continent. And speaking about the continent, EU projects are transnational and about partnerships. So you need to have partners in different countries. Again, there are some funding available for projects that take place at a purely national level. That's very rare. The majority of projects are transnational, and you will need usually minimum 3 member states. There are some small scale projects here. Because partnership building is such an important topic, we will have a dedicated session on this, as Emily just mentioned, next Thursday. It's part 2 of this series. We will talk about only about this very important topic and element of an EU-funded project. EU projects are policy-based. That means that the funding programs and the calls you are applying to are thematic, for example, education, environment, interregional. These programs and calls are financial instruments to put the policy that was written before into action. And that means for you, when you apply, you always need to link your project to an EU policy. For example, if you, combine sport with, let's say, environment, you should link it back to the policy that was written, for example, the EU Green Deal. So you don't need to be an expert on all of this, but you should know what the main policy priorities and policies are and link to them, refer back to them, if you combine it with such a thematic focus. But we will also talk about that later. EU projects are co-financed, so they usually involve some element of co-financing or what is often called matched funding. It is expected that there will be some investment from your side in terms of, for example, time, overheads, etc. And we advise you to check the co-financing rates before applying. Again, those rates vary. Most fall somewhere between 60 and 80%. EU projects are impact-oriented, and as we will talk about impact and impact measurement later on today, I'm not going into detail here. Just for now, it is an important step, and it's not only in the implementing and reporting phase of your project, it already starts in the project design and the project writing phase. This is a special characteristic. I call it the social element. So it's a recommendation from our side. It means concretely, if your project is about, let's say, rugby or badminton, add a social element. Involve in your project, for example, communities with fewer opportunities, young people, marginalized, excluded groups, healthy life. It's an added extra, it's a plus. Your application will get this extra level of consideration and in the end, better chances to get the grant. To make it very concrete, what types of activities can be funded, that again varies according to the funding program, but in general, it is knowledge exchange and transfer, comparative research, events and conferences, mobilities, capacity building, trainings, workshops, very concrete project results, for example, toolkits, new technologies, methodologies, building of networks for professionals, for example, or also campaigns, initiatives, awareness raising, all kinds of those things. To summarize it up, what EU funding is, it is an opportunity to learn and share, to connect with and influence policy, to be innovative, to fast track strategic objectives, to collaborate with partners, and for you to build your capacity and your organizational profile. What it is not, it's not quick, it's not easy, it's not without risk, it's not core funding, again, mostly, and it's also no national funding. So you have this transnational, this international aspect in it, again, mostly, but yes, just what I mentioned. So what we would like to do now is use Mentimeter, which is a tool where you can put in and give us feedback and comment on this. And we have a question for you. What ideas do you have for a sport project? So what we would like to know from you is what idea do you have in mind and what would you like to put into a project? So for that, and maybe my colleague can put the link into the chat, that would be nice. Otherwise, I will do that very quickly.
Yep, I got it. Just a moment.
Okay, thank you. So I can do that. No, it's fine. So you click on the link that you see in the chat, and I will share also my screen now with, there you just put it in and then we can see. Just a second. So what ideas do you have for a sport project? We would like to know what you're thinking about, what you have, what kind of groups you would work with, just the topic, the idea. Everyone knows how Mentimeter works. Do I need to explain it a bit more in detail? It's fine, right? Okay, so the first ideas are coming in, and that is a good topic: young people's participation and promotion of young people's participation connected to a sport project. It's just what I said, it actually adds to this social element. Developing and training high performance female coaches at international level. Very interesting topic, and also here combines this transnational level. It already has this network building aspect and this educational and training aspect. A schools program for disadvantaged areas, very interesting topic. Inclusivity, knowledge transfer for athletics coaches across Europe, very interesting. Training for coaches and volunteers, exactly. So this is often what we see, that that it's always often connected to this topic of education, even though you usually would have kind of a sport project, right? And then you don't think of it, but it's often has this educational, this training, this learning element. Small NGBs with no employees network to share information and resources, interesting. EU-wide competitions, exactly. Physical activity and health education for healthy functional aging for middle-aged and older adults. Okay, great. Thank you so much. I think this is a good overview. Thank you for sharing all your ideas. And I would now stop this and hand over to my colleague, Emma.
Great. Thank you very much, Christina. I'm going to go ahead and share my slides. See, oh, 1 second. Yeah, it's very interesting to see everybody's ideas there, and it sounds very appropriate for Erasmus Plus Sport, which is good. It's promising. Okay, so I'll just turn on the presenter view. Excellent. Okay, so listen, thank you very much, everybody, for joining us today, and thank you to Emily and Christina for getting us kicked off. My name is Emma. I'm the European Programs Manager at the Wheel, and the section that I'm going to cover today is all around designing your project concept. So as Emily mentioned, this will kind of assume that everybody is at the same level. So it starts as quite entry level, but I think that there is kind of something for everybody in here. Once I'm finished this, then we'll hand over to Cormac to have a bit of an overview of some different types of sports projects. So jumping immediately into this concept, the theory of change, which some of you will be very familiar with. But basically, the theory of change focuses on mapping out or filling in what has often been described as the missing middle between what a program does, its activities, and how it leads to desired goals being achieved. So basically, it can be very easy to see what the problems or gaps are in your own profession, in your own sector, in your own area of work. And it can be very easy to imagine what would be a better way of doing things. But what's difficult, obviously, is plotting that route in between, the kind of problematic point A and the better situation at point B. And this is what project design is really about. We review a lot of projects as part of our program Access Europe that we deliver at the Wheel, which is all around kind of building people's capacity to engage in EU funding, and we do trainings like this. We review applications. We give people that kind of hand-holding advice that they need to kind of get on their EU funding journey. And what we often see when we're reviewing applications is kind of an overemphasis on the idea. But a project really isn't about the idea. That's the first step, obviously, and it's very important. But ideas are a dime a dozen. We all have great ideas. What really makes or breaks a project is whether you can do the missing middle part. That's the essential bit. And that is what the funder is looking for. So it's just very important when you're designing your project not to neglect that, not to get too swept up in your idea and forget about the missing middle. So if you look at the kind of second point there, basically in the theory of change, you work backwards from your idea, i.e. these desired long-term goals, and you essentially reverse engineer it, your idea, until you have identified all the things that need to happen, i.e. all the conditions that need to be in place for that better situation to be a reality. So when planning your project, always remember that missing middle, and make sure that you're clearly illustrating not just what you're going to do, but how you're going to do it. And that's what makes your project kind of stand out from a funder's perspective. It becomes a sound investment rather than a kind of risky gamble on a good idea. So when we talk then about what, the missing middle and all of that kind of thing, and like, how do you fill that part of your project in and reassure your funder that you know how to deliver this project and that you've considered all eventualities. These are some of the things that you need to consider. So the first thing is, what are the key steps? So for example, what outputs need to be produced? Now, outputs tend to be kind of tangible or results from a project. They used to be called intellectual outputs. They used to be called that because they were, standalone pieces of work that wouldn't exist had it not been for that project. So for example, a piece of research or a report, or if you're doing training for coaches or volunteers, the course content. Maybe it's a piece of technology if you're building an app. These are all examples of outputs, and these sometimes outputs are necessary to reach your goals. They're not always necessary, but sometimes they are. So you need to have a clear idea of what outputs are necessary, what activities are necessary. So what things need to happen, project activities that often feed into the outputs, for example. So research and development and, monitoring, engaging stakeholders, all of that kind of thing are the activities. And then sometimes events as well. So these are your meetings and conferences and workshops and things like that. So you have to have a very clear idea of all of the key steps. How will you implement it on time, on budget, and as promised? And this is one of the most overlooked things. People really overlook project management, and reassuring the funder in the application that you can deliver this project, that you're not just an idea that doesn't have anything kind of underpinning it. So you need to be able to illustrate this, that you've considered how you will do this on time, on budget, and as promised, because that makes them feel very confident in their investment. How will you know that it's working? So you'll hear a lot about impact today. I think Christina's already mentioned it. We're going to zone in on it even further later on, because again, this is a really key thing that people often, they think that the idea is great, and so therefore the impact is obvious, but it's not. From the funder, they need to know exactly, because your idea of impact could be very different from theirs. So it's very important to zone in on impact. And like I said, we're going to go into it with a bit more detail later. But this is all about how do you know that what you're doing is working, and how do you link your project activities to real results? Because a lot of the time, we do things thinking that they're feeding into it. But if you're actually to step back and measure the impact of that, you might find that you're putting an unnecessary amount of time and attention into something that's yielding very little in terms of results. So they are always concerned with making sure that every activity, everything that you have planned is linked to a real impact. Evaluation is another thing. So this is how you're kind of measuring impact and measuring quality then as you go along. They want to make it clear that they want you to know that you do have these kind of methods in mind, that you have ideas for how you can evaluate the progress, the quality, the impact, all of that kind of thing. And then also that you have some kind of idea of what quality looks like in your project, because again, people can have very different ideas of what quality is. So if they're not really sure that they understand, you know, what quality looks like in your project, if you haven't explained to them what high quality looks like in your project, it doesn't fill them with confidence that they're going to get something that they would consider high quality. So they want to be able to see that you're on the same page when it comes to what a quality project looks like. And then KPIs, key performance indicators, are obviously very important for all of those things, to be able to give them something solid, you know, saying like, oh, we're going to reach people, you know, like, what does that mean? Like who and when and how many people, and, you know, how do you want them to engage, and what kind of satisfaction rates are you looking for in terms of their engagement? You know, so it's these kind of, it's the vagueness that really kind of makes projects fall down even at this early stage. Now, you don't have to, obviously this doesn't arrive fully formed in your head, you know, it takes time to flesh all of these things out, but these are the questions you need to ask yourself. How will you make sure the right people are on board? So you know, this is if you're looking to change something fundamental about your sport and about the way things are done, obviously a single club isn't going to be able to do that. But if that single club worked with a network of other clubs and maybe had the national representative body and even the EU representative body on board, well then, you know, real change might be possible. So, and it doesn't have to be at that level. Say you want to create community change. It's just a local level change that you want to make. It could be just about engaging the right people within the community that are stakeholders in this project, and to make sure that you've thought about that. And then how will you make sure people know about your project? So there's no point creating, you know, the best thing in the whole world and then nobody knows about it and nobody uses it. So it's about considering how will you disseminate your results and make people aware of it, and make sure that it's kind of mainstreamed and embedded into your sport and into your way of working and everything. So these things, you know, when you hear those kind of things, sometimes it can be a little bit daunting that there's all of these different facets, and you know, like I said, it doesn't arrive to you fully formed. These are all things you kind of have to hash out as you're designing your project. But it's one of those things where it depends on the scale of your project. So if you're applying for hundreds of thousands of euro, then yeah, you're going to want to have a pretty comprehensive project management, impact methodology, stakeholder plan, dissemination strategy, all of that kind of thing. But if you're applying for a low level grant, like between 30 and 60,000, which is a lot of those kind of small scale collaborations that you can now get through Erasmus Plus, they're not expecting you to have, you know, incredible KPIs and, you know, really detailed project management methodologies or anything. Your project management methodology could be really simple. It could just be a couple of pages where you demonstrate your approach. Like, you know, when a project is funded, you have an initial meeting, you plan out all your steps, you have quarterly check-ins, there's one place for recording progress, there's, you know, Excel sheets for tracking finances, there's, you know, all of this kind of, it can be very simple, but it does have to be there. These are the words that they're looking for when they're scanning your project: outputs, activities, project management, impact evaluation, stakeholders dissemination. If they're not seeing that, then you're not giving them the opportunity to tick that box that you have completed that bit of the project design, and you've thought about that when you were strategizing your project. So a really simple way of, like, the theory of change can be quite kind of complicated and big, and there is an interesting handout that can be good for that we will show you later, that can be really good for kind of teamwork and using the theory of change to collectively design projects. But there is in the first instance, there is a thing that I use all the time that I just said I'd share. It's called the problem solution impact approach. You can see that I've created this very sophisticated graphic to illustrate it. And basically it breaks down projects, and any project, no matter how complex, should be able to be broken down into these three categories of: what is the problem? What is it, as in, like, what's the situation now? What is the status quo? Why is it bad? Like, what's wrong with the way things are currently? What impact is it having? As in, you know, what are the negative fallout as a result of the current conditions? And what will happen if it continues? As in, you know, if this goes unaddressed, what kind of negative impacts can we expect down the road? So that's the problem. And then there can be a solution. So this is your project, basically, as you're proposing a solution. So what is it? What is this solution that you're offering? What do you want to achieve? What are your objectives? And what evidence is there to support that this works? Do you just think it'll work, or do you have some reason for believing that this will work? Is there some kind of evidence to demonstrate that? And then impact finally. So this is, what are the specific results and outcomes that you will achieve? And this is where you have this opportunity to kind of be bold and leave your funder feeling optimistic. So the reason that this works is, as you can see from the graphic, is that, you know, funders are people too, and they, you know, they have emotions, and they want to be inspired, they want to be excited by projects. They review hundreds and hundreds of these applications, and they need something that is clear, is compelling, is, you know, emotes a little bit and kind of gets them excited about the project. And so structuring things like this, people consume information very well in threes like this, and they appreciate when you bring them on a little bit of a journey. So the whole idea is, by focusing on the problem first, you kind of depress them a little bit, or at least, you know, communicate the gravity of the situation. And it doesn't have to be the end of the world. It can be something as simple as, children are not engaging in sport, and this is having a negative impact on their mental and physical health. Like, that's a problem, right? So you just need to communicate the gravity of that problem and kind of depress them a little bit. And then you offer them a ray of light. So you get them a little bit kind of excited because you've got a solution for this problem. And then you dazzle them and impress them with the impact. So this is where they start getting excited and get really on board with your project idea. So when you're starting to design a project, it can be really helpful to use that as your kind of guidance. And as long as you can, like in the first instance, you'll often have a very clear idea of what the problem is, and you'll have kind of a good idea of what the solution is. But if you ask yourself all of these questions, it helps you to kind of flesh out your idea. And you can literally just like write it on a piece of paper: problem, solution, impact, and start filling it in from there. And that's how you flesh out, often the missing middle of the project. So I just created an example out of thin air. I don't think it's a very good example, but let's just go with it for the purpose of this training. So again, just made this up. So what is the problem? The example would be a project where it's about children who are less active and more isolated after lockdown. What impact is it having? High levels of stress and anxiety, increasingly sedentary lifestyle. And what will happen if it continues? Well, we can expect that this is going to lead to poor mental health, to poor physical health, and increased child obesity, and a negative impact on learning and skills development. And as an example of how to use reputable sources, I've just pulled out now. These are, you do better research than this in real life, but I just kind of pulled out a couple of examples there, where you have the Eurochild report, which does demonstrate that kids have been really negatively impacted by the lack of sport and other extracurricular activities. And then there's a UNICEF report there about child-focused or learning and development in and the impact that sport has on that. So this is, underpinning the problem with evidence to prove that this is a real issue. Somebody in there, and then you go on to the solution. So there we go, solution. So what is it? So again, I just created a fictional project. So for example, you might use existing sport infrastructure, existing kind of clubs and things that happen at local level in communities to launch an outreach program with primary schools to engage/re-engage children in sport, age 7 to 12 in sport, right? So again, this would be about honing in on the idea and being as specific as possible. So using existing sport infrastructure, that could also have other happy side effects, and that there's more collaboration then between different types of sports, and then honing in on a very specific target group. Talking about, you're going to reach all children, that's kind of unrealistic. These are usually 2-year projects. That's not going to really happen. But honing in on a very specific target group, again, fills the funder full of confidence that, okay, they've really thought about all the eventualities here, and they're honing in on a very specific idea. And then what are the objectives? Increasing cooperation between different sports stakeholders, removing barriers, increasing awareness of benefits and opportunities. Again, this isn't a perfectly fleshed out idea. It's just an example. What evidence is there to support that it works? So again, I just kind of pulled out that UNICEF support. And then there's also, I think this is actually Sport Ireland one, about children's sport participation and physical activity study, which kind of does, underpin this point. And then you're going to talk about impact. So this is where you give them the numbers, the really solid stuff that they can get their teeth into and get excited about. Because again, what you really want to avoid at all times is being too vague and too abstract. You want to tie it down to something real that they can be like, right, okay, this sounds like value for money. So, we want to support this. So what specific results and outcomes do you want to achieve? So increased mental and emotional health, increased activity levels and physical health, increase capacity for learning and development. So you want to kind of counteract the negative impacts that you listed earlier. And then be bold, and even this is where you dazzle them with the numbers. So you're going to have a campaign and materials and information that are going to be translated into all the different partner languages. You're going to have a cross-sectoral campaign in each country. You're going to have a pilot program with 100 students in each country. You're going to have a pilot study, produce a report or a publication, and have an EU conference. Now, not all European projects have to look like that. That's just an example. But these are the types of things, and that's what they like to see, an actual, like, you know, that you're not just over focusing on the idea, but you're translating it into real steps and actions. And just some general tips for that. So use reputable sources like what I used there, and link it back to EU policy, as Christina mentioned earlier, in as much as possible. So the EU has sports policy. The whole point of sport funding is to drive those policies. So if you can demonstrate how your project helps to further their own objectives, their own policy objectives, that's just brilliant. Use other reputable sources, but you can also conduct your own research. So you and your partners, for example, like maybe you're trying to develop kind of education and training for coaches or volunteers. Maybe you do kind of a focus group or a survey or a consultation of some kind with your group of volunteers and coaches here, and then each partner does it as well. And then you're gathering real information from them about what their training needs are. And they love that. The EU love that, because it's showing that you're responding to real needs, you're linking it in with evidence, you're linking it in with EU policy. That's just like a tick, tick, tick for them. They love that. And that's really good best practice in designing projects, to make sure that it's linked in with your actual work and your actual needs. The other things just to remember is keep it simple. The other very common mistake that we see is people see that, you know, this funding is their opportunity to achieve everything that they want as an organization. So they stuff loads of things into a project and just way overcomplicated. And they don't realize that, you know, it's, you know, a project is just one step. No one project is ever going to solve an issue. It is just one step. So keep your idea really simple. Don't try and achieve everything in one project. You won't be able to do it, and it'll you know, kind of pull down the quality of your project. But also there's a real risk that you'll kind of lose the evaluator, that they're reading your project, and then if it starts getting really complicated and there's bits that they don't really understand, and if it doesn't seem realistic to them, they're just going to be like, okay, this seems risky. I don't want to invest in this. So the simpler and more straightforward you can keep it, the better. Ask questions. So this is, I often call this invoking your inner toddler. So this is, you know, when you're planning activities, ask yourself the question like, how, when, why, where, who. Like, so how are we going to do this? And why are we doing this? And when is this going to happen in the project timeline? And who's going to do it? And where is this going to happen? Like, it can be really annoying. Like, as somebody, like I design a lot of projects for a living, and it can be, you know, you come up with a lovely idea and you get all excited about it, and then you have to bog yourself down with asking yourself all of these questions. But it's really important, because you're going to be asked that in the application. And so the more you can kind of flesh out your idea before you go to start filling out the application, and before you go starting to build your European partnership, the easier it'll be, because your partners and the application form will all ask you these questions. So, you know, really questioning yourself about everything, and how is this going to work? It's the make or break about whether it's a good and doable idea or not. So it's very important to kind of ask those questions. And just a general rule of thumb that I think is just a life fact in general, and that we all probably know, but it's especially true for European projects, is that everything will take longer than you think. National projects are more agile, they do move more quickly. And when you're collaborating with partners, it is slower. Now, there's lots of other benefits to collaborating with partners, obviously, but it does mean that things take longer. So just factor that in. And then once you've done all of this, one really good thing that you can do, and we'll send this on to you as a template afterwards, we'll look at it again as part of the tools section that we talk about later, is to then fill in a concept note template. So this is, as I said, we'll send this to you. So it encourages you to break down your project. So you have your working title, your funding body. So in this case, it would be the EU, or for example, Erasmus Sport Programme. Your duration, so I think it's between 12 and 24 months. The deadline, mention the deadline that you want feedback on, your budget estimated, and basically you break it all down there. And you can use the problem solution impact approach in this as well to present your project. And as I said, do your research, be specific, zone in, ask yourself all the toddler questions, the who, what, when, why, where, and be as specific and zoned in as possible. And once you have that step done, you've kind of really actually addressed most of the 4 steps that Emily illustrated earlier on. So you've done your research, you've consulted the relevant people. That might be your stakeholders, it might be your own internal management team, and you will have developed this kind of concept note. So and then at this point, once you've developed your concept note, your project idea is now pretty much ready to go. It's fleshed out, and it's about recruiting your partners and getting the buy-in of your wider team and kind of getting their sign off more or less, so that you're ready to actually start writing the application. We're going to look at designing your EU partnership now in a second, and this is just about kind of choosing what type of partners you want. In the next session, which is next week, I think, on Thursday next week, we will look at actually building that partnership and best practice about reaching out and building networks and collaborating with partners. So that's kind of a whole other story, which we will get to next week. But for now, you know, just in terms of designing an EU partnership, so before you even reach out, you do have to kind of ask yourself, well, what kind of partners do I need to deliver this project? And so this is what this is about. It's still in that kind of design phase, which is what we're addressing today. So designing your partnership. So this is kind of a checklist of things to go through as you're designing your partnership. Checking my time. So you need to ask yourself what skills are needed to deliver on your project. So for example, if you wanted to create an online learning module, so in an online learning platform, a module that was all around diversity and inclusion in sport. And this was going to be available to all coaches and volunteers. Lovely project idea. That sounds great. Right? But you're a sport organization. You're not necessarily very, you know, experts on diversity and inclusion education. And maybe you know absolutely nothing about how to build online modules or educational technology or any of that kind of thing. So you need to make sure that your partners bring those skills. And that's really what EU partnership is all about. It's an opportunity for different sectors and different types of expertise to work together to solve a problem. So they love seeing those kinds of partnerships as well. Now, that's not to say you can't have a purely sports-based partnership. Of course you can, but it's just, you know, you need to ask yourself what kind of skills are needed. Maybe if you need research done, you're looking at partnering with a university. And maybe, you know, you need, the whole goal is like a campaign. So you need people with really good networks, any of that. So you need to ask yourself, what do you need from your partners? What skills or assets or capacity do you need for this project to deliver on it? How can partnership help deliver on it? So what's the benefit of collaborating with partners here? If your project is something that you would really just rather do yourselves, but you need to tack on partners because the EU requires it, then maybe it's not an EU project. Maybe you should be looking for national funding for that. You know, there needs to be, that they can see through that very clearly if you've just tacked on partners as a kind of tokenistic kind of thing. You need to be able to kind of clearly demonstrate that the partnership is essential to deliver on this project. Why should this be carried out at EU level? What is the European dimension? So again, by having real collaboration with your partners and really needing them on board in order to be able to deliver that project, that's an EU dimension. But it's also, you know, if your project is overly focused on Ireland, for example, and the Irish sector and the Irish state of sport and what we need to change in Ireland, they're going to be asking themselves, you know, well, what's the point in us funding it? Get your own government to fund it. There needs to be something that's clearly there from a European perspective and a real value for this being funded at EU level. How will you allocate tasks and responsibility across the partnership? So again, another very common thing that we see is an overfocus on the Irish sector for one thing, but then also, you know, reading applications, it's like, and the Irish partner will do this and this and this. And it's so obvious that the Irish partner doesn't know or trust their European partners that well. And either whether it's, well, it's not always a trust issue. Maybe they do trust them, but maybe they don't feel comfortable allocating tasks to them. And this isn't a real partnership. A real partnership should have very clear roles. Everybody should be there for a reason. They have something that they're bringing to the project and they have real responsibility and a real role to play in the project. That's very important. So some typical things might be if you have more than one work package, maybe different partners lead different work packages. Maybe if you're having an event or a training or a mobility, which is like a kind of a, for example, to attend sports training abroad, to like bring a group with you, like maybe one of the partners will lead that. Or dissemination, which we mentioned earlier, somebody might monitor that throughout the project and measure it and report on it and lead on creating dissemination materials. And then quality evaluation, maybe somebody who creates the tools for measuring all the quality, collects the evidence, analyzes it, compiles it, that kind of thing. So there needs to be a meaningful role for each of your partners and a real reason for them being there. Because again, they will ask you this in your application. So the more you can kind of prepare for that before you even start inviting people, asking yourself these questions of like, okay, who do we need to deliver this project and what kinds of responsibilities would we give them? And it's also then better than once you approach them that you have a clear ask of them as well. So then finally, what research preparation should your partners do? And this is important because it's, you know, a lot of the time people ask their partners to do nothing. Like they don't ask them to do any research at their own local level. They don't ask them to send on any information. Like whenever I'm building a partnership, I always create like almost a mini application form for the partner where I collect information from them in terms of what's their local context, what's their need for this project, is this a project of strategic interest to them, what can they bring, like what kind of networks do they have, what kind of expertise do they have, all of that kind of thing. And it helps me collect information that I can then include in the application form, but it also helps to make sure that they're committed and on board. If they send me back something that's really not great and isn't great quality, I'm going to assume that, okay, they're not very invested in this project. You know, why would I include them in this project if they're not going to make an effort at this stage? Like what would happen if we actually got the funding? Why should these specific partners be involved? What do they bring? So what special skills do they have? And then potential associated partners. So associated partners are basically organizations that endorse your project. They don't get any funding and they're not involved in the everyday running of the project, but they endorse the project. So often it would be like a national or an EU level representative body would agree to support the project. So they might help disseminate it. They might give feedback at some point. That's a really nice way of kind of doing really good stakeholder engagement, increasing your dissemination potential, and then also, you know, getting that EU dimension if you do involve an EU body of some description who are on board and who endorse your project. So these are all things to think about. That's when it comes to designing your partnership. As Emily said earlier, if you have questions about this type of thing, for one thing, you can ask towards the end. You can also, we'll have plenty of time for Q&A. You can also email me directly. But that's it for now in terms of designing your EU partnership. And I'm going to hand over to Cormac now to give you some examples of projects in the area of sport that will hopefully illustrate what we've already chatted about today. So Cormac, when you're ready.
Okay, great. Everyone can hear me okay?
Yep.
Thumbs up.
Yeah.
Little emoji thumb, be good. Good morning, everyone. Thanks to Emma and her colleagues, Christine and Emily, for that excellent introduction and the first session this morning. Just from a sports sector perspective, we're very lucky to be working with the Wheel and the Access Europe team. They have a wealth of knowledge that they're making available to us, and I would just 100% and wholeheartedly advise everyone on the call that has a project idea to connect with the team here. They can certainly smooth the way and help get that application together. So just also to say that just from my perspective, I'm on a learning journey as well around European funding, and it's really interesting to actually be involved, get involved with projects, but also just be learning about what's happening. I'm just going to quickly run through a couple of examples of projects that I've kind of been observing just over the last while. I think I dropped a web link there to the European portal just in the chat earlier on. In that portal is a really important portal to be able to just look at everything that Nora or Emma has been talking about, the policies, the funding opportunities, the various calls that the European Commission put out there. Okay, so just getting familiar with the actual websites and where those calls are published, and indeed looking at that is just really good start point as well. So quickly, just to jump in, maybe next slide.
Cormac, you're on mute there.
Thank you, Christine. Was I on mute for that whole period?
No, it just happened.
Okay, Great.
All good.
So look, just a couple of quick ones. And just to say off the bat, from a project point of view, really they come at different levels. Projects can be small, they can be medium, they can be large scale projects. They can be small in that involving, you know, a very small group of partners, and then and a modest budget right up to, as we will see in a few minutes. Here, and I think we have one of our colleagues on the Football Association with us on the call this morning, Derek. This is one that I just picked up on from the Football Association of Ireland, who are actually quite good at and seem to have been quite active on European projects over the last number of years. But this one is a mobility a project that's focused around football, and is quite a simple project. I think it was from 2018. But the project was simply to actually connect coaches, 16 coaches and staff members, and be able to bring them over to a big football club in Spain, Valencia. And so quite a simple culture, maybe knowledge exchange and in the coach education, linking to the ETB and the coach development and education program. And, you know, a small enough budget really, but a modest of €40,000. You know, as I said, quite a simple project.
Cormac, you're on mute again.
Well, and next slide, please. Okay, so this is one that I just came across quite recently. Text is a bit off on it. Apologies for that. This project involves one of our the Clare Local Sports Partnership as being one of the main partners on the project, and it's a rowing and outdoor sport. It's basically rowing for. I think it's a rowing outdoor sport for education, and I think it has a disability focus. I think it certainly has a disability focus. I think this project also, you know, has 4 partners across Europe. And again, I think it's a mid-sized project. I haven't seen the actual budget for this program, but was funded reasonably recently. So I know that Clare Local Sports Partnership are working on this one at the moment with partners. But again, it's I think a disability and a social inclusion focus, also education. Next slide, please. This project is from Tralee. Tralee IT actually are the primary partner on this project, titled In Sport. It's participation in sport for persons with disability. The aim of this project is to develop a model for the inclusion of sport for people with disability based on a survey of existing best national practices and greatest barriers to inclusion in European Union member states. So obviously a massive issue across all European member states. Social inclusion for persons with disability. Just to say that Tralee IT and the hold the UNESCO chair in Ireland, but have been involved with many projects over the last 10-15 years. This project involves working with, I think it's up to 6 or 7 partners, and it's a pretty large scale project. It's a ballpark, 290,000-300,000 euro project. That would be a sizable project from European perspective, and I think it's an Erasmus Plus sport program. Next slide, please. Just another example of, again, a fairly, I suppose, a significant project. The Irish partner on this one was Ireland Active, the representative body for the gyms and fitness centres in the country, and they've connected with, I think it's upwards on 6 other partners. 6 other countries. So in effect, running the National Fitness Day as part of the European Week of Sport in across Europe. So again, turning National Fitness Day into the a European wide initiative. And so a large campaign around education, around awareness raising, around promotion, and basically initiatives to link and use National Fitness Day as a large physical activity intervention, as part of European sport. So again, sizable project, Erasmus plus sport, and probably events, I think, there possibly, or else a collaborative partnership project. Next slide, please. Yeah, just to basically, this one was basically, it was kind of some of the ground I covered in just the previous workshop we did. But, you know, one of the main programs that we're focused on in sport is the Erasmus Plus Sport. And really, there is something in this program for everyone, right from, we say, club level and community level, grassroots sport, as the term is used in Europe, right up through to, we say, county level and regional level and national level federations, and indeed international collaborations. So, you know, you can have quite small mobility exchanges about basically sharing and you know, movement between countries, where you might have coaches or staff visiting different countries and such like, right up to policy research and all of those things that Emma touched on. So again, you know, the small scale partnership, yeah, basically open to public and private organizations in program countries. Transnational projects, minimum of 2 organizations from 2 different program countries. Emma and the colleagues will talk about the policy areas separately around this, but there are actually policy objectives, of course, within the area of sport, physical activity, health, social inclusion. Yeah, and again, typically projects run from between 6 and 24 months, and there is a variety of, you know, there was a call in 2020 for projects. That was a bit rushed. It was the start of the new program, but it's likely that this program will open again in the new year, in 2022. So just interestingly, I was able to look at a spreadsheet on the European website which showed the 2019 projects, and there was about 250 projects funded in 2019. Now, only 23 of those projects had Irish partners. Of that list, there was only, I think, 1, maybe 2 that were led by an Irish partner. And now we have a situation where the UK is not participating or will not be on European projects at this point. So there is an opportunity for Irish partners to connect more with European partners around projects. So there will be a lot more searching for Irish partners, English speaking, and you know, partners to engage with projects. So just be aware of that. Yeah, so as I said, there is definitely project opportunity and funding opportunity for most sport bodies under European funding. I think that's it for me. Is there another slide?
No, that's it. Thank you very much, Cormac. Let me just see. Can move on to that. So yeah, we're coming up on a break now, but absolutely, just to echo what Cormac said, there's a huge opportunity now. Use Access Europe. This is the program that we're running at the Wheel. We provide all kinds of support. So if you have an idea and you'd like support to making it a reality, or if you want to develop beyond being a partner in project and want to start leading a project, or you just want to get started for the first time, come to us and we can help you. So just to kind of reiterate that, we are going to take a 5-minute break now. So we'll try and come back here now at 11 to just have a bit of a stretch and get yourself a glass of water, whatever you need to do. And we will reconvene for the next bit, which we're going to start looking at some kind of practical tools for how to design your project. So we'll see everybody back here at 11. Thanks. Okay, hi everyone. We're getting to 1 minute past, so we'll give people an extra few seconds to come back. We'll allow people who are maybe quickly grabbing a coffee to filter back in. I just see some comments there just about the huge number of opportunities that there are that are not being fully exploited by organizations in Ireland, well, in Ireland right now, in terms of like joining partnerships or applying for grants. We're definitely not applying at the same level as other member states. So there's huge opportunities there, and definitely people should 100% engage in that. And there is even bigger projects. So like interreg projects were mentioned here. Derek mentions that. And yeah, it is something that the administrative and financial reporting burden of projects is an issue, of those major projects. We're definitely working at Access Europe to try and streamline that as much as possible, to make it more accessible for civil society groups who maybe don't have that kind of structure in place to be able to manage those huge projects. But as you said, Derek, it can be extremely rewarding. Let's just hope that they'll continue to simplify and streamline the application process, the reporting process going forward. So we'll keep working on that, if just because it's in everybody's best interest for it to be a bit more accessible. So that's great. Look, we'll continue on. I think, am I handing over to my colleague Emily now?
Yeah.
Agenda. Yeah, that's great. So I'm going to stop share and hand over to Emily.
Thank you. Okay. Okay. So we're going to talk now about building for impact and sustainability when you are designing your project. So the first thing we're going to look at is impact. And I know both Christina and Emma touched on this already, but this is just kind of re-emphasizing the fact that this is a very kind of interconnected process. So the more you hear about impact, the better. So impact is, as was mentioned, kind of the fundamental change that happens as a result of an activity, that activity being your project. And there can be impact on kind of various parts of the project. So you're looking at the effect it has on your target audience. So maybe that's 7 to 12-year-olds that have been affected by the lockdown, and the impact that you hope to have on them is that they have kind of increased engagement with sports as a result of being involved in your project. You may be looking at the impact that your project has on its stakeholders. So that's the project partners and your own project team within your organization. So do they have kind of increased professionalization around a certain skill set? Have they developed a different skill set because of this project and its activities? What kind of impact does your project have on systems and practices? So things like qualification and accreditation systems. And ultimately, what you would like to do is see an impact on EU program objectives and policy as a result of your project. So a handy way to kind of think about impact as you're kind of developing and designing your project is to just always keep in mind what's the long-term change you're trying to achieve in terms of your target audience, the stakeholders, systems, and kind of EU program objectives and policy. Okay, so when you're trying to demonstrate impact in your project design, here are some kind of handy questions to keep in mind and to kind of guide you. So number one, what change are you going to see because of this project? Why does it matter? And importantly, would this change occur without this project? So is this project necessary, or would this change happen anyway? So you're really kind of selling it to the funders here, that this change won't happen without this project. So who will this change happen to? Be specific. So as Emma mentioned, you really want to hone in on who your target group is. So it's 7 to 12-year-olds impacted by lockdown. It's not all children in Ireland or in all the partner countries. You have to be specific, because that's the way that change will be affected, is if you can really focus on a certain group. And then how will you know that this change has happened? So this is really important. So what kind of tools are you going to use to measure and have evidence that this change has occurred? So the way that you kind of measure change is through indicators. And again, Emma touched on this earlier. But so something to keep in mind is that if you're achieving impact or change, your project has to include a way of measuring this change and give evidence that this change is happening. So that's where indicators come in. So they're measures that allow progress towards a goal to be tracked and they're demonstrating the real value of an activity. So it's not about hitting target numbers, it's about demonstrating the effect of an activity. So something to kind of, an example to kind of keep in mind is that what you're actually trying to measure is not kind of maybe the number of meetings that you're having within a project, but the effect of the meeting. So is there enhanced collaboration between different sports groups and organizations, or more effective communication about kind of different campaigns, that kind of thing. So you're really looking at the ultimate effect of your activities and not the number of activities as such. So just for example, here are some kind of ways, some kind of indicator examples that you might consider. So things like increased levels of motivation or confidence, increased feelings of responsibility or self-esteem, higher personal and career aspirations, things like better health and fitness, or greater levels of concentration or engagement as a result of the activities that you carry out through your project. So we're going to give you some kind of tools later, and we're going to give you a tool for kind of measuring the overall impact of your project. But these are just some kind of suggestions for kind of tools that you can use while you're actually knee deep in the work of the project. So what you want to do is assign every kind of impact that you have an indicator and figure out how you're going to measure it and how often you're going to measure it. And it doesn't need to be a super complicated system. It doesn't have to be highly scientific or technical. It should just be whatever works for you. So keep it as simple and doable for your organization as you can. So things that you might want to use to sort of track impact throughout the project are things like focus groups or individual evaluations. And by that, it can just be kind of sending out a survey monkey. So maybe at the start of a module, you kind of assess how young people feel about their levels of motivation to engage in sport. And then after they engage in maybe a module of your project, you assess them again and ask them how they feel about it. So it can be as simple as that. Things like observations from practitioners about maybe people's level of engagement or self-esteem, storytelling, skills tests, analytics. And analytics sounds fancy, but really what that could mean is something like how many times somebody's gone to your project's website, how many times they've liked a Facebook post that you've made about a piloting activity or a campaign that you had in the project, or how many times maybe somebody's downloaded your project's newsletter. So it can be very simple. So just keep it kind of doable for you, and always remember to kind of focus on the ultimate sort of desired long-term change that you want to come as a result of this project. So the next thing we'll just touch on briefly is sustainability, which is another kind of buzzword you'll hear a lot throughout the project design process and when you're actually writing the application. So when we talk about sustainability, what that kind of means is that it's the capacity of the project to continue its existence and functioning beyond the end of the funding. So the ways that kind of the funders would assess whether or not a project are sustainable are things like if the results or the outputs that you develop, the tools, the tangible things that you develop throughout the project are maintained or developed after the funding ends. So maybe you kind of keep running courses as a result of this funding. You update your tools, that kind of thing. The results from your project are kind of disseminated continuously after the project ends. So it's not that people stop hearing about them. You kind of keep pushing them, making people aware of them, trying to encourage them to embed the use of your results into their own work. And that importantly, the results from your project can be scaled up on different levels. So on a national level, regional level, and ultimately on an EU level, so that these results can be kind of replicated and used anywhere. And they're not just sort of like intrinsic to your own organization's work, that other organizations will get value out of them. Okay, so how do you demonstrate sustainability when you're designing a project? So these are some things that you might want to keep in mind when you're coming up with your project concept and when you're writing your application, which is something that we'll focus on in the third session in this series. So what's going to happen after the funding ends? So what you want to be indicating in your project is, in the design of it, is that this is the first step in your overall EU development plan, that you have a long-term vision for what you'd like to do with EU funding, and it doesn't just begin and end with this project. So what you're going to do once the project ends is continue to use the EU networks that you've developed over the project lifetime to apply for other EU funding projects, to maybe kind of bring new innovations to the idea that you've developed in this project, or kind of look at other ideas and develop new project ideas. So aside from kind of applying for other EU funding after the end of this project, what you might want to do is use kind of this project as a springboard to apply for national funding as well. So we would kind of recommend each partner in a project to develop their own kind of national development plan to apply for national funding. And this is a really good idea because as a result of it being involved in this project, you'll have been able to have the credibility of saying that you've kind of piloted the results throughout the EU and that you have the backing of the European Commission, which would be very attractive when you're kind of approaching national funders. So after the funding ends, hopefully the results will be embedded in you and your stakeholders' work. So if you've created a module or kind of toolkits, they're not just going to sit on a shelf in an office. Like, you're going to continue using them in your work, and it's just going to become part of something that you do, in your daily work. And then ultimately, again, that you want to be able to mainstream your project results, learnings, and benefits locally, regionally, nationally. So you keep sharing them after the project ends, keep encouraging people to use them, let them know about the value, and because you invested a lot of time in this project, and hopefully your partners and your stakeholders are too. So you want people to be aware of that and how it can kind of improve other people's work as well. So the key kind of takeaways from here are, one thing is that you want to remember the change you want to create and measure it at all times. So keep going back to that impact. Ultimately, what do you want to see fundamentally change as a result of this project? You want to keep in mind that this is the first step in your EU funding journey, and that you have a long-term vision and a plan for your project and your EU development, and that you plan to mainstream your project results and your learnings and the benefits that you gleaned from being involved in this project. That this project was not just about your organization and what you got out of it, but how it brings added value on a national level, on a regional level, and at an EU level as well. So that is it from me. So I'm going to hand it over to Sheila now for her case study on I Coach Kids.
Hi, sorry, I'm just trying to get the presentation up. I'm hoping that you're seeing it, but you're not seeing the slideshow yet.
Yeah, we can see it. Yeah.
And do I need to swap it around, or are you saying the right one?
No, swap it around to the slideshow there.
Thank you. Sorry, I don't know why mine always comes up like this, but inevitably it does.
Yeah.
Good. Oh, it's still morning. Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much to the Wheel for the opportunity to talk about the I Coach Kids project. To Emily, Christina, and Emma, and also then to Cormac, because it was Cormac who came to me and asked me would I talk about the I Coach Kids project, the historical one more so, but also maybe just a little bit about the current project. So what Cormac asked me to do was to speak specifically to these questions. Where did the project originate from? What were the goals? How were the objectives set? How did you find the partners? Did the application take long? And how did it go overall? So I'm hoping that the 10 minutes I have, I can address many of these questions for you. And if there's anything else anybody needs to know at any point, my email is at the end of the presentation anyway. It is so nice to see so many familiar faces on this call and so many familiar names. And I'm sure most of you are very aware of the I Coach Kids outputs, but you may not be aware of how the project came to be. So for you, I'm hoping it might be different as well. So I've divided the history of the project into two sections, because believe it or not, this project goes all the way back to 2011. And in 2011, I think we were called Coaching Ireland at the time, and we did some research into the educational needs of our coaching database. At the time, we had about 200,000 people registered on the database from all the different governing bodies right across the system. So the research was very much, it wasn't academic research, it was more marketing research, trying to identify what were the needs of the coaches out there. And the reality of what we found was, while many of the coaches felt that they were well equipped to coach their sport, they had difficulty when it came to the population they were coaching, specifically as it related to children. So The problem that was identified from that research and also from other research that was ongoing at the time was that children were dropping out of sport at an alarming rate. Now, there were very low numbers meeting the physical activity guidelines, and that came from the CISPA study. And at the time, the 2011 identified that only 14% of Irish children were meeting physical activity needs. Also, the coaches of children within the sports system identified to us that they felt they were the least qualified, that they were the least valued, and that they were the least supported in the system. So we identified that problem, and I Coach Kids was very much conceived in Ireland. So we had identified that problem. So in order to try and provide a part of the solution, because it was never going to be the complete solution, a part of the solution was to develop the Sport Ireland Coaching Children program. Now that program is available on the Sport Ireland website. The link is there. And I'm sure again that many of you are aware of that. But in order to do that, we needed to reach out to our international partners and the international sport and coaching community in general to see what was happening out there. And we specifically wanted to reach out to people who put the interests of children first. And so during that process, we got together with a group of people, and you're going to see who they are in a minute. And we actively looked for opportunities because we felt that what we were trying to do was so important that we needed to find funding from somewhere. We didn't necessarily have the funding internally in any of the countries, but we needed, it was too important just to let it slide, and that we needed to find the finance somewhere to drive this project forwards. So very early on, we had an idea of what we wanted to achieve, and we had divided into two phases. So we very much had this preparation phase, and then we had the delivery phase. We intended to look at the workforce, and this is important actually because this original funding didn't come from Erasmus Plus Sport, it came from Erasmus Plus Vocational Education and Training. So we looked at the needs of the coaches. So we wanted to identify an audit of the workforce across the 8 countries. We wanted to look at case studies of best practice, because there was no point in reinventing the wheel, because, sorry for the pun if anyone got it, but anyway, there was no point in reinventing the wheel. We needed to look at what was really good on the ground, already existing in Europe and the rest of the world, and how we could incorporate that. We also wanted to develop a coaching curriculum for children. Then in order to make the impact on the ground, we needed to make sure that there was education available for these coaches, online, free, really easy to access, and then that the study guides would link directly with all of that material. So that was, we had a broad outline of what we wanted to do. So this comes back to then the question of partners and people. Our partners were absolutely essential in this, because all of them had a real serious interest in what we were trying to achieve in relation to children, putting the needs of children first, and making sure that sporting environments were appropriate for them, and trying to drive that into practice, into policy, and into systems. So we not only looked for partners with expertise and experience, but we also looked for people within our partners. So that's why I've identified people/partners. So we went to Leeds Beckett was our first port of call in relation to Sergio Lara Leeds Beckett. And then we had worked, so that's Leeds Beckett, we had worked with the ICCE very, very closely in the past. And we had also worked with Laszlo from a project in the late 80s, early 90s. Sport Ireland, the Hungarian Association of Coaching, and the Royal Belgian Soccer Association and the Netherlands Olympic Federation, they all have responsibility in country for the education of coaches. So we had a level of expertise between all of us, with the added bonus of the Belgian Soccer Association. We got Chris van der Hagen, who had totally reimagined soccer for Belgium. So he had done some practical work on the ground. When we got this is the Madrid, can you see my cursor? No? Okay.
No.
So when we got the Madrid University, this is the UE red one at the bottom, we got experts in the area of online education. Okay. When we got the Lithuanian Sports University, we got the ability to research in Lithuanian and the Russian languages, which were so important when we developed all of the work later on. So it was very much a case of who had the expertise. So it was not just about, also about ensuring that the people we selected had to link to the coaches of children on top of all of their work. That was really important and still is really important. In relation then to how we moved it forward, and this is the history part 2. So I Coach Kids started in 2016 then. So our original research was done in 2011. We started to develop in country initially. We reached out externally, and then we were successful in getting the first lot of funding for I Coach Kids in 2016. Okay. And the reason why, what made the project so special and what made it so important is that we were trying to make sure that all youth participants in sport were inspired to stay involved for a lifetime, not just for a season or for 3 years, as many of them are dropping out after 3 years, but to inspire them to stay involved for life. We wanted to champion sport education in policy and in practice, but a type of education that puts children at the center of the process, okay? But then what happens is that because of, in many ways, I think we were at the right place at the right time. We had this massive interest globally from sporting organizations, but also from countries. So World Rugby, UEFA, FIBA, we got Nike on board as well in relation to sustainability, European Handball, the Coaching Children Collaborative in the UK, countries like South Africa, Portugal, New Zealand, Australia, Hong Kong, Singapore, Luxembourg, they all came on board with our project and supported us in relation to translation, in relation to dissemination. So very early on, by 2019, we had this global reach that none of us really had ever planned for. So today, and you'll see from the materials in a few minutes, I Coach Kids continue to promote sport globally, but very much specifically within Europe. Okay.
Just a 2-minute warning there, Sheila.
Okay, thank you.
Nice.
You've obviously heard of my history. I could keep going forever. So basically what we developed initially through the first I Coach Kids project were 3 MOOCs, massive open online courses, 3 of them available for free in, I think, 7 different languages now, and study guides to go with them. Okay. We also then we have lots of different social media outlets. We have 300 videos on the YouTube site. We have 92 videos linked to the MOOCs. We have 60 presentations and 50 activities. These are the countries then that we reach, and the users on the current platform, there's over 100,000 users from over 100 countries. Our last conference was 2020, and we had 4,000 attendees, and we had them from 80 countries. Now, obviously that was online, and our conference this year in December is equally online. So we have this connection right across the globe. Now, this isn't coming soon. The website has just been updated, and it's got areas for coaches to learn, to connect, and to coach. So to learn from the MOOCs and the study guides, to connect with other coaches out there in the system and set up groups, special interest groups, but also in relation to coaching, because this does facilitate coaches connecting with the parents of their athletes or their athletes themselves, depending on the age and the country. And then going forwards, our future plans, we're currently right in the middle of iCoach Kids Plus. iCoach Kids was 6 to 12, and iCoach Kids Plus is looking at 13 to 17-year-olds, and that funding does come from Erasmus Plus Sport. We've also submitted an application under, again, Erasmus Plus Sport for iCoach Girls, and that is, we are joint leads on this. We're the technical lead, not the administrative lead, and we're January, we'll know if that application is successful. So that's an overview of the iCoach Kids project. The website is there. You can access all of the information. My email is equally there. And I'm assuming you're taking questions at the end. So thank you very much for the time and the interest.
Great, Sheila, that was just excellent. Thank you very much. And yeah, that's an excellent example of a very high level project. That was an extremely impactful and ambitious project. Don't, that's inspiring, but don't let it scare people as well. There are such thing as lower level projects than that. It doesn't have to have that big of an impact. You could definitely do something a bit more local at a lower level, but that's a really good example. I particularly liked, when you talked about each partner had very clear roles and skills that they were bringing. So again, that kind of harks back to what we were talking about earlier. There was a very clear benefit in partnership and in doing this at an international level. And there was a very clear EU dimension to it, even having that European Council involved. And you started with a long-term vision and kind of worked from there. So that's exactly, best practice in project design. So we'll forgive you the wheel pun that is, it's banned in our office to say that, I think. But yeah, just based on such an excellent project. And what's also very interesting, I think, as well, is the fact that it was originally funded under Erasmus Plus Vocational Education and Training. So that's another thing, like, it can be a little bit vague sometimes about where does your project belong. I mean, it's a sport project, but it's actually very focused on youth, or it's very focused on professional development. And, that's a kind of question of, where does is it more sport, or is it more youth, or is it more sport or more adult education or whatever? And that's something that you can come to us with if you have questions about that. So that's exactly what Access Europe is here to do, that we can help you find a home for your project within. So you just come to us with your idea and we'll tell you, okay, this is actually a bit more sport, or this is actually a bit more adult ed, or whatever it is. So we can help you with that. But it is interesting that, like, there's no solid lines between them. It can be quite blurred, but it's just about trying to find the correct home for it. So look, I'm going to go very quickly through a couple of tools now in a second that you can use in project design. But I'm also going to give you a warning that in about 5 minutes, we'll be taking questions. So if you have questions, please put them into the chat box now, and Cormac will be reading through them and we can put them to the right person, whether it's Access Europe or Sport Ireland or Sheila or whoever it is, to answer your questions. So, it's made me go back to the beginning. So let me just see. Here we go. Tools for project design. Okay, so this is something that actually I'll ask Christina to speak to earlier, because this is something that she's used before in her work, this theory of change worksheet. So this is something that you can use at the initial planning stage. So it's a bit small now. You will receive the proper follow-up kind of handout for it, but maybe Christina, you could briefly explain how this works.
Sure. So very briefly, what Emma was talking about, the theory of change in the beginning, and this worksheet, I would recommend print it out in a bigger size, take your team, take Post-its, and then fill out this together. So the theory of change can be super complex, and this try to put it like on one single sheet, and also what it so to have it in one overview, but also that you see the relations, so that you start with the challenge and with the impact, and everything in between is your project, right? But you really need to formulate the challenge and the impact you want to reach, and then you can see, okay, so do I have the right resources for this? So do I have the right stakeholders? Do I have the knowledge, the skills? Are the actions that I'm doing, like the events, for example, or the toolkits or whatever, what I'm doing, like are they actually leading to those outcomes that I'm aiming at? And is it around this target group, all of this? Is a target group involved? So this worksheet is just a very simplified model like leading you or making you ask the right questions, and do it with your team so that you're all on the same plate. That's it.
Great, perfect. And as I said, thank you, Christina. As I said, we will send that to you afterwards and in a more legible fashion. It just didn't want to fit onto a slide for me. And then the other thing I mentioned.
Can I make a point there, Christina?
Yeah,
Emma, just on that worksheet. Many of the sporting partners that we work with, Sport Ireland work with, may also be familiar with the logic model diagram, which in effect is exactly the same as the worksheet, but it's just turned on its side, as it were. Of course, a logic model is exactly the same, which basically we talk about impacts, we talk about outcomes in the shorter term, we talk about what exactly goes in to deliver the outcomes, and what resources and actions are needed to generate that. So many of our sporting bodies would be using logic models, which is exactly that, turned on its side, and uses a spreadsheet.
Great. Well, look, maybe if you want to share that with us, Cormac, we could include it. We'll include all of these in the follow-up. But good to know, like there is, there's lots of different ways to go about it, but it's fundamentally the same thing. And it's fundamentally about populating that missing middle that we talked about earlier, the point A to point B and how you get there kind of thing. So the other thing we touched on earlier, and I won't go through it in too much detail, but just to reassure you, will receive this project concept note template in a Word document fashion. And this is, once you've done all your brainstorming and your designing and problem solution impact, logic model, theory of change worksheet, you've fleshed out your idea, this makes you put structure on it. And this is often the tool that you use then to reach out to partners. This is how you introduce yourself and say, hi, I'm from such and such a sport club in Ireland. We're interested in doing an Erasmus Plus project. Here is our concept note attached where you can read all about our project idea. Come back to me with any questions. And as I said, we will get on to that next week then in terms of the actual process of reaching out to partners and building partnership. We'll go into more detail about that, but it always starts with this kind of concept note that encourages you. It's a communication tool for your project. So we'll send that on to you. And you can always then also use it to send to Access Europe as well, send to us so that we can review it and give you some feedback and let you know, what extra details you might need or where your project belongs, all that kind of stuff. Another really handy tool, this is actually taken from the sport application, the Erasmus Plus sport application. So there's you can download lots of different Gantt chart templates online, obviously, but it's really it's really important to kind of plan out each task, plan a logical and evenly distributed workflow so that there's not these terrible pinch points where everything kind of converges, and to factor in what I said earlier, which is that everything takes longer than you think. So this is, again, a very handy thing. I don't think you necessarily have to have it when you're starting to reach out to partners, but certainly, before you start writing, to work out your Gantt chart, because throughout the application, it'll be, in month 3, we'll do this, and in month 6, we'll do this. So if you have a Gantt chart in front of you, obviously it's a lot easier to do that than trying to make it up as you go along and potentially not having a coherent timeline to your project. So very handy to use a Gantt chart for designing your project. And then another thing, we talked a lot about impact. You'll be sick of hearing about impact, but it's to try and demonstrate just how important it is. That's really what the funder is looking most for is impact. Emily showed some tools for, while you're in your project, how do you measure impact with your participants and your stakeholders and all that kind of thing. But this is another tool that we use at the Wheel for overall monitoring of the project. So basically when we get a project funded, or you can do it at the design stage as well, you can use it at either stage, we pull out from the application or the concept note or from the idea, what are all of the, if you see in the top line of the table there, the activities and outputs. So what have we promised that we will do in this application, or what are we promising that we're going to do? So for example, we might have promised that we would do a workshop or a series of workshops, a comms campaign, develop a new education resource. Maybe you're going to do like a sport kind of competition or something like that. So you've promised all of these things. You pull out the description. How would you describe those things? What did you say you would do? What was the expected impact? So what are you expecting to say, we're going to train 100 people through a series of workshops, and they're going to all be, we're going to get feedback from each that 80% were fully satisfied with the workshop. So they're your key performance indicators. Actually, they go in the next bit. But you talk about your impact, you put down your actual key performance indicators, and then throughout the project on a regular basis, then you can actually go back and go, well, okay, what were the actual results as opposed to the expected impact? So maybe actually only 80 people attended those workshops. So was it achieved? Well, no, but explanation is, well, actually we got a higher level of participation, or we got better results, or, you know, we decided to scale it down for a strategic decision reason. And then similarly, maybe if you got 120 people instead of 100 people, you explain that you actually had, you know, such and such dissemination method really worked, or you just had, it was really popular and all of that kind of thing. And then you have your evidence, which might be things like sign-in sheets, registration forms, pictures from the actual training itself, the materials from the training demonstrating that you did create them and deliver them and everything. So this is a handy way. And if you kind of think about it when you're designing your project in terms of lifting out those impacts and listing them, and then how you're going to describe them, how you're going to, what you expect to happen as a result, and how you expect to measure them, it again just comes back to that. So as I said, I promised questions. So we are at the question stage. So I don't know if there, Cormac, did you see anything in the chat that you want to pose to the relevant person? So now is your chance. I can have a little scroll here as well. No worries. This is a few people having to leave a little bit early, which is totally fine. Thank you for joining us. I see from Roisin from Triathlon Ireland, is it an option to apply for one of the funding initiatives for previously run programs, projects that we may have run over the past number of years or are currently running? Also, are virtual programs projects an option? Thank you. Okay, Roisin. Yes, so it is possible to okay, if it's part of your core work, if there's nothing new or innovative about it at all, and you're basically asking for funding to just keep your staff in jobs and to keep the lights on and the doors open and all that kind of thing, then no, I mean, there's nothing interesting or innovative about that from the EU's perspective. However, you could absolutely take something that you have piloted or run in Ireland. So an example, the Wheel actually did this not too long ago. We ran this program for social enterprises. It was a development program for social enterprises. We ran it at national level. It went really well. We got really excellent results from it. So we decided, right, this is a perfect thing to scale up to EU level. So we took that program and we Europeanized it. Basically, we added a bunch of partners who could fill in gaps that we didn't have. We demonstrated in the application, we demonstrated that, you know, here's the successful results from where we ran it nationally. So we know that this model works. So we have evidence, and then we backed it up with all the other kind of research that we've done about social enterprises in Europe anyway. And we made that application and it was successful. So we actually just got that funding a couple of weeks ago. So you can absolutely take something that already exists, but you do have to kind of scale it up and Europeanize it in some way, or add some kind of new innovation, or demonstrate why this is a great new thing or a great new kind of step forward for it. And then in terms of virtual programs, there are opportunities for kind of digital projects, but there's not a lot of funding in that, because a lot of the funding comes from like exchanges and visits and conferences and face-to-face types of things. But it's not impossible. There's certainly been more about that, obviously, during COVID. So yeah, we can answer a bit more specific questions about virtual projects if you have them, but just to say, yes, they are possible, but the budget rules are different. Sorry, Cormac, I see your hand up.
Yes, just to say, and it's possibly something that maybe slightly wasn't mentioned through the session, but really collaborative partnership projects, of course, are about partnerships. It's about a couple of different partners coming together, agreeing a project. While a concept note, and certainly all of the bodies hopefully on this call will have ideas, will start drafting a concept note. The concept note is what's shared between partners and it evolves into a project. So you ultimately move from what a project that you want to do to a project that we want to do, your collection of partners. And so there is a transition. And so ultimately your idea of a project will evolve. And so if you've got a basic, obviously a project that you've been working, an area you've been working on already, a kind of an area that really is important to you, that's the start point for the discussion. That's the concept note, that's your concept note. That might be then something that you will share and collaborate with some partners, and it will possibly evolve into a larger project might develop a few different lines on it, you know, whereby other objectives from other partners are also being met. So it's a start point, you know. So I think that bodies have to be flexible around, you know, projects, and you know, they don't just happen kind of just because you've got a project and you just want to push that project on. It'll oftentimes evolve.
Yeah, 100%, Cormac.
Yeah, as I said, I know we'll be touching on developing partnerships later next week, and indeed the following week will be about consolidating projects. And to be honest, just to say to everyone, and I know some people are dropping off the call, but we've had a great turnout, that really the start point is the concept notes, and it's really between now and next week, if people had a look at those concept notes and started actually drafting a couple of ideas down, that'd be a great piece of work to do between now and next week. And just to reiterate, just to encourage everyone to join the session next week, because it will get into a bit more detail around how to actually form partnerships. And that's the big question certainly a lot of entities have. Who do I connect with? How do I know who's a good partner? How do I reach out? How do I connect with? And you know, and indeed, you know, many sporting bodies will know other sport partners, but they may not know other folk within a sector. So they may not know people working in social inclusion, may not know any, have contacts in other areas that they may need to connect with on a project. So again, that's a really that's a tricky area, and I think a lot of you know, people coming into this for the first time, so it's an obvious question. You know, how did the partnerships establish? How did you get to know these people? And indeed, how do you actually kind of know that they're a trustworthy partner to work with on a project? You know, so look, in terms of questions and answers from participants, I'm conscious that there are a few people on this call that have been involved with projects, and you know, very much encourage you to connect with me and send me on some details about the projects you're working on or have worked on. But is there any questions out there, or would anyone want to, does anybody want to contribute, say anything?
Feel free to unmute yourselves if you want to. I just see another comment here just about couldn't agree more, C. Kenny, about the timeline. So the earlier the better in terms of developing your concept note and starting, and totally agree with Cormac as well. Actually, that project that I just cited there, the social enterprise project, I mean, it started with my concept note, but that hugely developed with the input and was strengthened by the input of all the partners. You know, they suggested their ideas then and added their own kind of tips and tried to align it strategically to them as well. And it was hugely beneficial to the project. And just, yeah, this whole being approached at the last minute by partners is common, I think. So whatever you can do to get the process started early and take your time and not be under pressure that you're kind of scrambling at the last minute is the best possible thing. And
Emma, can I just share? Can I share a screen there just briefly, sure, just with participants, just to kind of encourage them between now and next week to have a look at this? What, you know, just going to just share here. Hopefully, hopefully you guys can see this. That's on your screens. Great stuff. So again, just this is the again the European Commission's, if you like, landing page for sport. And I would encourage everyone between now and next week, if you can at all, just to kind of log in here, have a look. We talked about the policy areas. We talked about various initiatives happening. This clues you into what's happening in Europe in the sport area. There is an action plan for sport. There is an Erasmus sport program. And so there are various things happening here, and there are priority areas within the sporting area around social inclusion, around migrant integration, around diversity and inclusion, fair ethics in sport, anti-doping, etc., disability, inclusion. These are all very, very important areas within the sporting policy frameworks for the European Commission. And so, yeah, you get a lot of signposts here. And of course, what you also can look at is if you click on, obviously, funding, you will see the calls for various funding programs in here. And so at the moment, there are no calls open, you know, because the most recent one related to social inclusion for refugees that they were looking for applications on. But the point I would make here is that calls come up usually at the front end of the year. And if you have projects that are ready and are in the pipeline, almost ready to go, you can actually kind of line those to meet project deadlines. So oftentimes when a call comes up on the website, there's probably a 2 or 3 month window for applications to come in max. And if you've already got a kind of a concept, if you've already got some partners that you're in dialogue with, you can actually kind of align and reach in here. Now these calls at the moment on the website are fairly specific. They're targeted initiatives. What the ones that we've been talking about mostly during this particular session is the more general ones, which are the collaborative partnership projects. And again, the call will come out for those later next year, early next year. And again, it'll be probably 2 months where projects will have to actually submit. And again, that's too short a timeline just to be thinking about it when the call comes out. You really have to have your work done and be ready to go and put the final touches on the application, and obviously work with our colleagues in the wheel to make sure it's really, really top drawer, and then you stand a really good chance of being successful on that. That's enough for me on that at the moment.
No, absolutely. Couldn't agree more, Cormac. The earlier the better. You know, we have also applied for, obviously not sport funding at the wheel, but we apply for Erasmus Plus funding. It comes out every year around March, and I'd be starting now to start planning my idea and building my partnership and developing concept notes. So I definitely urge everybody to kind of take that approach as well. Well, look, I think we have a few slides to finish. We might be able to finish up a few minutes early, seeing as there isn't too many questions coming in. But obviously, of course, if you think of questions later, just contact myself, contact Cormac. We're happy to help. So I think, Christina, do you have a couple of closing slides just to finish things out?
Exactly. So this is just the wrap up. Let me share this. So actually, we found it's not open calls under Erasmus Plus, but it's something interesting that could be interesting for some of you. So it's a sport award. And what this award is doing is that it's aiming to reward the best project that have successfully supported social inclusion through sport. So it's not an open call for projects, but you can be awarded. So this is what is right now up there. So if you're interested in something like this, maybe it could be interesting for some of you. We will send this around. Yeah, just as a wrap up, if these calls that Cormac also just mentioned coming up, if you want to if you want to get updates on new EU funding programs, on deadlines, sign up to our newsletter. We have a monthly newsletter, and then you get it into your inbox. All infos also about EU policies. We offer from Access Europe free trainings, free events like this one, the event series that we're having here. Emma and Emily also mentioned it throughout. We have the one-on-one advice, application support, so just reach out to us. And also we provide networking opportunities locally and at EU level for exactly this partnership building aspect. So this is just to let you know what Access Europe is able to do. And this is us, Emma, Emily, and myself, Christina. This is our website, accesseurope.ie. You will also find us on Twitter, where we on daily basis post everything like new calls, but also get interesting new policies, all developments around this. And you can reach us via europe@wheel.ie. So, and that's it. We thank you for joining us today. And I stop my presentation.
Great. Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you.
Just a quick note there before we go, just to say thanks to Sheila from Coaching, Sport Ireland Coaching, for her case study and the excellent work on I Coach Kids. It's a great project. We will definitely have a couple of other case studies on the other sessions, again, just focusing on different practical kind of, coming together. Sorry, Sheila, there wasn't too many questions coming to you on the session today, but you covered a lot on the piece. Yeah, look, just to encourage everyone, if you can at all, to join next week and build on what you've heard this week. And again, this will all add value to you as you prepare an application ideally for Q1 2022 or such like, Okay, thank you to everyone, and thanks to the
Thank you very
team.
much. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.